You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. Hello and welcome to TFM's local watering hole. So excited to be coming at you from the Garden State, New Jersey. This place is looking great. We've got a brand new hero in town, and I'm so excited to have with me the one, the only, Christy Morris.
The glitter queen herself.
Wow. Ooh, would that be your superhero name?
Glitter queen? People might think I'm something else.
Oh my goodness.
No, I'm thinking more like what's his name? Shazam, where he's like lightning from my hands. It would be crystals from my hands.
Oh, there you go. Okay, I see it. Crystal Hand. All right.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, we have the world's worst superhero names here, apparently. And before we go down the rabbit hole too far, we just want to say thank you for listening, and we do really appreciate it. Of course, we would really appreciate it as well as if you would find us on social media and follow us over on the 602 Club on Twitter, and then we're Instagram at the 602 Club TFM. We're also on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM, and you can find the listeners only discussion group as well there on Facebook, and you talk to listeners from all over the world. Got the website, trek.fm, where you can find all of the shows we're doing, and we'd really appreciate it if you would go to patreon.com/trekfm and see how you can be part of our team. It does cost quite a bit for us to put all this together, and we really can't do it without you, and it's definitely been a rough few years for us. So again, patreon.com is where you can make sure that all of the shows here on Trek FM keep coming to you. Christy, I am very interested in this because I know you have a lot more familiarity with a lot of the Marvel comics. You and your husband, big fans, and read a lot of them. And so we are going to be talking about Ms. Marvel, the latest Disney Plus show here in the never-ending Phase 4 of the MCU. And so coming into this, I am really fascinated. Was this a character you were familiar with at all? And had you read them at all, the comics at all? And were you excited kind of coming into this show at all?
So I was a big fan of Captain Marvel, the comics, and then of the writer Kelly Sue DeConnick, and really got into her character in that run. So I then later, when the movies came out and everything, heard that there was a new character called Ms. Marvel, but I have never read those comics. But I had heard of her, and knew that possibly the powers would be similar, and that it was a relatively new character, and didn't know that a show was coming out until suddenly it was announced that it was on Disney Plus. Yeah. I was like, okay.
Yeah,
what about you?
They have been coming out. I would say the Disney Plus shows Fast and Furious here, and of course, no relation to the actual Fast and the Furious franchise. So, I read the Captain Marvel run by DeConnick, and I wasn't really a huge fan. I know people really liked her run there with Captain Marvel, but I just didn't really find it all that interesting, or it just didn't appeal to me. But I'm glad other people liked it, and I knew that they had reintroduced the idea of Miss Marvel, which actually, the funny thing is Captain Marvel was actually Miss Marvel before that, and there's a really strange long history with this character in the first place, but they had a new version of Miss Marvel that was a teenager who was of Muslim origin and those kind of things. And so I knew that kind of coming into the show, but I have never read the comics. In fact, I'm not actually reading many comics these days at all, really. I just have kind of lost interest. And partially, in all honesty, it's because they just have not been good. I haven't found anything that really worth keeping track of. I still keep track of some of the Star Wars comics, but that's pretty much it. And so Yeah, I couldn't say whether I was excited or not about this because I just kind of came into it. I only knew a little bit about the character and kind of what the show would be. And then obviously I knew coming up we were going to be connecting to the next film that has Captain Marvel in it with the Marvels. So this is basically building towards that. And so, you know, not really knowing anything, I was kind of just coming in and, okay, show me what you got. And so, which I found, honestly, one of the things about this show compared to some of the other shows and even just some of the movies or whatever, I was very struck by the fact that the show feels a lot more grounded because the storyline is really much more about Kamala and her family and kind of like the normal people of the MCU, like than, you know, anything else. In fact, the closest thing I can think of in the MCU would be the Spider-Man films that we've had so far, at least the first one where it was very grounded. It's more about Peter and, you know, we obviously have the teenager there element as well. But I was thinking about how even Hawkeye, the show, you know, felt more grounded for the most part because of the type of character. So that was something I wasn't necessarily expecting coming into this, having a character that was, you know, going to be cosmically powered. This was a really grounded show about, you know, basically growing up in the MCU universe.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, it was interesting that they brought in a different way of telling stories in the MCU by including the younger generation. You know, obviously with the films and everything, we've ended on a really kind of sad note, obviously. And it's like, where do you go from there? So this is also another way to continue on in that universe and tell interesting stories.
Right.
But I do think, you know, sort of like you said, like if you didn't know anything about this character, then this is also a good way to keep the story interesting as well. So it's not so fantastical as like the Captain Marvel movie, I think at times felt so beyond anything we can comprehend. You know, that it's really about like space and, you know, aliens and flirkins and stuff.
Yeah.
And so this, definitely the opposite of that, very grounded. And that piece of it I really liked.
It also, I mean, even just in that grounded nature and really kind of dealing with, you know, the kind of the teenage elements that feel very similar to a lot of things you get in like a John Hughes type of film, you know, where you've got these kids in high school and them kind of dealing with growing up and all the problems that go along with that and everything. In a lot of ways, it reminded me, you know, we covered Stargirl from DC, the first season of that. And this kind of felt similar to that. You know, it starts out pretty grounded, you know, there's superhero stuff involved in it, but it's really more of a story about like a family and their place in this world and specifically, you know, the main character's place in this world as they deal with the ramifications of getting powers. So I thought that was something that really works actually to the show's benefit, is that it doesn't spend as much time worried about how it's completely connected to the rest of the MCU. It spends a lot of time really just trying to tell you the story of Kamala and her family and what happens to her when she gets powers. Right.
And even subjects like being Pakistani in America and, you know, being Muslim and the differences with like, you know, she wears standard American type clothing and her hair down, whereas her friend wears a headscarf, you know, so it's like some things that maybe you or I wouldn't usually understand or know about. And I really like that they're bringing some things in like that to explain more about her as a person.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I think with the character, it's a good time to kind of talk about our main character with Kamala. You're 100% right, is that we spend a lot of time exploring the world of what it's like, not only to be an American high school student, but a Pakistani American in, a place like New Jersey, what it's like to be someone who's also Muslim, and the ramifications too of past history, right? Which is the splitting apart of Pakistan from India, and all the things that happened there. And how that impacted the family as well. And so I thought they did a really good job of introducing us to this character. And I think, like, for her, one of her biggest traits is the fact that she constantly has this desire to be bigger and better. Like, she has this, her love is of Captain Marvel. And her desire is to basically be larger than life. She wants to be, more than she is. She wants to kind of surpass the life in which she has, which she's not necessarily grateful for at the beginning of the show. And part of her journey then as a character is actually becoming more grounded in who she is. Which is interesting, that she actually becomes more grounded in who she is as a person, from her history to who she is now and who she will be in the future, all because she got cosmic powers, which is a very interesting way to tell the story of a kid finding themselves. But I thought, again, it's one of the strongest parts of this show was that journey that she goes on. She legitimately is on a hero's journey in this story. And I like that we spend a majority of the show really following her, and there isn't too much extraneous material here that really detracts too terribly from introducing us and letting us follow her journey throughout the show.
Yeah, I will say I felt like the first episode or two, there were some things that distracted me from the story here that they're trying to tell with her and her family. That was just, I think they were leaning too much into this is a high school kid show. So it felt a little goofy sometimes when they were trying to actually explain a serious point. But I do think that the core story was good. And I like that they really show that she's wanting all of this, stuff to be more like Captain Marvel and to be larger than life and stuff, and is missing the point that she's already special and that she should learn more about her real life and family and, this bangle that she comes across that's then connected to all of that makes her realize she already had something special.
Yeah. I mean, and I think Iman, as the actress, does a really good job of kind of portraying that. For the most part, I again kind of harken back to the Stargirl, where it's like the girl playing Stargirl I thought was great and helped kind of draw you into the show and, kind of get past, in some ways, the same kind of things that you're mentioning a little bit. Like sometimes you lean a little bit too heavy into like the teenage stuff. And yet, I felt like the actress here is very much able to kind of bring you through those things, and so that you can connect with her as we get into the more serious side of her character, which I thought was really, there's a lot of interesting things that they do. Just they add to her character the idea that she's part jinn. Which is connected to the Noor dimension, which we explore a little bit, and these clandestines from there. But also, they actually change her origins from the comics, which is she's an Inhuman, to the fact that the idea of mutant. And so she is she's actually, I think, really our first big link to the fact that, I mean, other than Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, where we actually saw Professor X from another dimension, that we're moving towards mutants. Like, that's we're gonna be exploring that. So, I thought that was all very interesting, but if there's one kind of criticism I sort of have here with all of these connections to where she gets her powers and whatnot, it's not that clean. And I guess we're not really supposed to care about these clandestines in the end or the Noor dimension that much, other than the fact that it might take over our world and destroy us all.
Just that.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Well, in the sense that what I mean is that it almost feels like it's not really all that important, other than the fact that that's where she gets her powers from. But we don't really do anything to truly like explore that or the clandestines. We don't know why they were actually exiled, why they're here really, and you know, so there was just a part of me that felt like, okay, she's got this part to her, which, you know, this Jinn origin with the Noor, but also she has mutant DNA, I guess, now too. And it's just like, it felt a little bit muddied because they were trying to maybe do too many things with where these powers come from, other than making it kind of cleaner and maybe a little bit more simple.
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely with you on that. I mean, I feel like they really made it a point of how much of a threat the clandestines are, and how she may have, you know, some darkness within her because she's part Jinn or clandestine or whatever. And I like that they tied it to something that's also kind of a real life fairy tale anyway, you know, genies that you and I would know of, or I immediately thought of Jinn from The Witcher. And then they're trying to make it seem like such a threat, but really not explaining what they're trying to do. And like you said, like why they want to do it. And then there's no resolution to it. It's like, so are they going to take over our world? Is the gate now closed? Is this like Stranger Things where there's other gates that are open? It's just, yeah, a little open-ended there, and then trying to tie her then together with mutants and stuff as well. It's like, let's stick to one of those.
Yeah, I can actually agree with you in that wholeheartedly. I almost wish that there wasn't that whole side of it. You know, I do feel like it's almost easier to do one or the other, but then you don't have a major villain in the show at all. I mean, there's nothing villainous. It's just, yeah. So,
yeah. Again,
it's not terrible or anything. It doesn't like ruin the show in that sense. But I just felt like I did kind of struggle with that aspect because it just didn't feel like we explored it enough to kind of really make me care about the stakes enough. Yes, they could destroy our entire planet, you know, and turn it into the Noor dimension, but I don't know. I never personally just found it all that terrifying, because I guess maybe it's not, I don't know. There's nothing about it that like made it seem all that terrifying. Even when they say, oh, it could take over the entire world. It's like, okay, well, whatever. And so,
like, what is their world like? Is it a bad place? Is it a good place?
Yeah. We never got a chance to like experience how bad that would be or any of those things. So, yeah. One of the things we kind of mentioned about her as a character is this kind of theme between reality and fantasy. And the fact that, you know, she always has her head in the clouds, and her mom specifically is very worried about her, especially in light of what her mother thinks is her family history. Mm-hmm. And I thought that this was fascinating because one of the biggest points of this, and the change in Kamala as well as with her mother, and her grandmother and even her father was the actual understanding of what the true history was of their family. And that true history changes everything about their perspective about themselves and the world around them. And I just thought that that was really interesting because it, in some ways, Kamala's fantasy became reality when reality meshed with the truth of the family's history. If any of that makes sense, which I thought was kind of fascinating.
Yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying. And I think that was sort of, what we were referring to earlier as well, is like, even though she wants to be Captain Marvel, she learns more about herself and realizes that she had all of this history that's also tied to the fantastical as well. That she didn't have to go searching for it. She already had it, kind of thing. And I think that's absolutely true. I mean, it was kind of interesting as well that it became a tie between her mother sort of taking out on her resentment of her own mother. We find out later that her mother, or Kamala's nanny, was always made fun of by the neighbors and was always, focused on, there was this history with Aisha and their family and stuff that she wanted to find out more about, but there was no proof. And so her daughter always felt like, I just need to get away from you because you're a loon and I'm going to go make a real life for myself with people that are focused on real life. And so then that's why she raises her daughter the way that she does, because she wants to protect her. She wants her to succeed in the world and not to turn out like her nanny was.
No, absolutely. And, we talk about it so much on this show because so many things that we discuss really hit home this point. But understanding the truth of history makes a difference on who and what we are. And that there is a reality to that. Like, in this show literally changes everything about who Kamala is, about who her mother is, her grandmother, and the relationships between them. And I think there's something so important because this show really does a great job of giving us the opportunity to see just how important truth is. Truth based in reality, not just what we want it, not like just our truth, but the actual truth. And and that's something I thought was really great about the show, because that true grounding is what helps Kamala be able to have even more than her fantasies, because it's real. It's not just a desire in her mind of like, oh, I wish I could be Carol Danvers or whatever. Like, the reality is so much different and better and scarier than she ever expected. Being a hero is so much more than you think it is when you actually have that weight on your shoulders. And I just, so I thought all of that stuff was just really well done in the show, and I really appreciated the show for that. And this is one of the few, Marvel shows, I think, other than seeing the way it was done in Hawkeye, where you're really celebrating family, like the nuclear family, and how important that is. We saw that in Hawkeye with his own family and how that's important to him and how he then gets to share that with Kate. And here, Kamala and her family and then her larger community are very important. Her faith community, which is such a beautiful thing to actually see, that these things are not just like side parts of people's lives. They're actually important to making us who we are in the first place.
What I mean, I love that scene where her mother hugs her and is, trying to help her with her knee. And she says, that your family is always here to support you. You're not alone.
Right. Yeah.
And so, I like that they show that if you take care of your family, they take care of you. And same with like your faith community.
Mm-hmm.
And, that it becomes more than even just your biological family. It's people that you're connected with, that you all support each other.
Right. Well, and the beauty of the way that they show their faith community is they're not all the same. They don't all have the same ideas about everything, and yet they come together to support one another. And I think it's really beautiful, and to learn from each other, to grow from each other. And there's something really nice about that. And again, it's just not something you see very often in television. In general these days, but I really appreciated about this show. And then on top of that, we had this really interesting discussion about, kind of what it means to actually be good. And her sheikh tells her that being good is not something she is, but it's something she does, which is a really beautiful thing, because to me, reinforces the idea we're not inherently good people, but what helps make us, what makes a good person is the choices that we make. Kind of very much akin to what Dumbledore tells Harry Potter about, it's about the choices. And I really love that, because the show then goes on to reinforce that idea of making good choices. If you want people to think that you are good and have good character and are somebody that they can look to, then you need to show them through good actions, through good works. And Kamala has to work through that in this season. And I thought that was actually really beautiful.
Yeah, I agree with you. I really loved that they showed Kamala, initially in the show, she was, like even my husband said, kind of a spoiled brat. She was the only girl. She, in her family, their only daughter, and really, didn't seem to want for money. They weren't wealthy by any means, but they were content. And she seemed to do well in school, aside from like the gym scenes and stuff. And yet she still was so combative with her parents. And, especially that scene where they wouldn't let her go to AvengerCon and then made a compromise, and she completely just, obliterates their feelings. You just kind of feel like, wow, she is really ungrateful and does not see all the stuff that they've given her. And maybe there was a way that she still could have made that work rather than being so mean. And it's like over the show, she learns that her looking up to Captain Marvel because of the stuff that she does, she can do things like that on a more grounded level. And that she needs to start with looking in the mirror and say, I could be better to my parents. And that action is doing a good thing. And so it's like things like that she starts to see. They're little things that are actions you take that speak louder than words and show that you're a good person.
Yeah, because there's another great line about how the only thing we can do is what we've been given. It's about us working with what we've been given. And so, and that comes to the idea of, then do we use that for our own benefit and just for our own selfish needs, or do we do that for others, which is driving at that idea of like what it means to be good, And there's also one more quote that I really liked about, just because someone treats you as their enemy doesn't give you the right to treat them as yours. And that, and so this whole show is really revolved around the ideas of, what it means to be a good hero and why heroes are heroes. And that just retaliating against someone because of something they've done to you is not always, or maybe even ever, the right course of action. And so I really appreciate that here about the show. And it's, you know, it's one of those things where in many ways Kamala's lesson becomes very much the Spider-Man lesson, and about with the great power comes great responsibility. And that's something that she has to realize in this show, is that with what you've been given, you know, it's kind of the same thing as what Gandalf says to Frodo. You know, all we can do with is the best we can with the time we've been given. You know, so I just thought that was really nice in the show.
I did have one other thing that I wanted to add to that from the show. I don't know if you felt the same way I did, but I also really liked that scene where she saves the child that was falling off the tower, because you see for a moment that she gives into the fame. And while she stands there and takes the time to pose, forgets that he's standing on something that could disappear.
Exactly.
And then has to go and try and save him again. And so she realizes in that moment, like, being a hero is also not just getting infamous and looking cool. It does bear great responsibility, and it's a lot more serious than that.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. And I think that is a part of that lesson, like we've been talking about, obviously. Like, that's what she's having to learn. Like, this is about the responsibility. It's not about, you know, getting famous. And that's huge. We kind of end up in the show with a little bit of a love triangle between her best friend Bruno and Kamran. And so I wanted to ask you about that. Obviously, you know, we mentioned it's kind of a teenage show and everything. Did you feel like that they handled that part of the show well? Was it too much, or was it just right?
I think that overall it was pretty good. It was a little frustrating that it felt like Bruno never really gets that moment to tell her how he feels and find out how she feels before they then kind of move her on to, you know, going further with Kamran. At least like with the connection, you know, not physically. And I do like, though, the way that it sort of ends with that is that sometimes you don't end up with either of those people.
Right.
You know, like Bruno ends up needing to go to Caltech, and if Kamran had been able to stay, maybe he and Kamala would have been in a relationship finally, but he couldn't. He had to go, you know, back to Pakistan. So
right.
She's got to now continue to figure out her way on her own and maybe find somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting to me, and I think it was, like you said, it was handled well for the most part. I did see myself, I guess, maybe frustrated on Bruno's behalf. You know, like, obviously he really cares about her, and, you know, maybe even loves her, and it is that classic thing where you just can't see what's right in front of your face, which is sad for him because, you know, it's also, he's a character that her family loves too, you know, which I thought was really neat to see that, you know, he is he is parentless because his parents have, I don't even remember if they even really say specifically what happened to his parents, but it seems like they've died. You know, he's running this store by himself. He's going to school. He's also a genius, which, you know, I mean, classic MCU. He's everything. But yeah, I mean, I think it was actually just kind of difficult to, you know, watch her not really see him. I think it's always difficult when you have that type of thing in a story where a character is just not seen by the person they're closest to in the way that they would want to be. And part of that, I think, is so many of us have all had that happen before. So, but, Yeah, I mean, it was pretty well done, and I liked all, just across the board, I really liked all of the actors in the show. I thought everyone did a really good job. I wasn't annoyed by anyone, which was great. Really important in these type of shows, and so yeah, I thought on the love triangle front they were great, and then just from a casting perspective and getting a chance to watch the whole series, I thought they did a great job with just casting in general.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there were no weaknesses really that it came down to with the cast at all. And I think that the focus was in the right places. I would say my only other critique a little bit is I don't know if it made you feel this way as well, but like being a religious person myself in general, I feel like I wouldn't usually be as casual or informal in addressing the religious leaders. That actually kind of made me uncomfortable because I'm like, she's not like addressing him as like sheikh or sheik, I guess you would say, or sir, or anything to really like show a little bit more respect. And so I don't know, that it sounds silly, I guess, but I felt like show some respect for your elders.
Yeah, I could definitely understand that. I know everybody kind of comes from different places, and so I think, yeah, I think there's definitely a way that you can show respect even if you're not using like a title of somebody. And so I kind of get what you're saying there. But I did enjoy, I think you're right. Like there just weren't any weak links when it came to like the cast that we were watching, which is always really helpful. There's nothing worse than watching a show and just kind of being annoyed when one person kind of comes on screen and you're like, oh, not again. So that did not happen here, which I was really thankful for, which has happened in some of the other Marvel shows. So,
yeah.
I'm interested too. This is something that I think this might have been one of my biggest frustrations with the show was with the villains and the DODC, and which we've seen before, specifically in the Spider-Man movies, and then the clandestines. And in many ways, I just felt like the show didn't really have a great villain in the first place. And a hero's story is only as good as their villain, they say. And I felt like that's one of the things here where we just didn't really have that, and it kind of frustrated me with the show, because it comes to, as we move towards the end of the show and the finale, it didn't really feel like it was building to something that was going to be interesting as we close it out.
Right, like a huge boss fight at the end or something.
Well, yeah, but I mean, not just a huge boss fight, and I'm not just looking for, massive CGI fest or whatever, but I mean, just something to where it feels really personal and everything, because it didn't really feel personal or as connected with Kamala and everything, and like fighting to save her community kind of thing that you would want, really.
Yeah, I think that you're right in a couple of ways. And one, I will say, I do think that the train scene, the way that they resolved that, was actually really good.
Yeah.
But it didn't have anything really to do...
where we go back in time was great, I thought.
Yeah. But then, the way that they tied that to the Jinn was cool. But then really it seems like the whole plan and place that the Jinn are from didn't connect to this any other way. I think it might have been more interesting if the villain ended up being that it was actually her great grandmother's twin sister who went bad, and started to destroy the family or something that's more connected to the rest of the very family-based story, I think is what you're feeling as well as I am.
No, I think you've really nailed that. And something like that would have been, I think, much more interesting to the show, because with the finale, it really led me to think about just the way this show connects with the rest of the MCU. And I think this show is best when it's not connecting with the rest of the MCU and it's just its own thing. Because there are a lot of things that came down in the finale that really bothered me that didn't make a lot of sense. One, why is there... I mean, we've been in the MCU for a really long time now. You're telling me there is not a better way to bring in new heroes than, like, being hunted down by weird DODC agents? That's really how we're going to do this? Like, and two, Spider-Man literally lives across the river. So you're telling me that, like, he's not available to, like, help out with this? And so a lot of that just didn't really make sense because it didn't fit within, like, we're in the MCU. Like, yeah. And then, I just overall connecting wise, Captain Marvel's been on Earth like 3 times at most, and never in a sense of like in front of the cameras. You know, like she's not Iron Man or Captain America or, you know, like, yeah. So how is she even a fan of Captain Marvel? That's one thing I didn't understand either. So there was just some ways in which I was really frustrated with the way this is supposed to connect with the MCU and how it just didn't always make a ton of sense. And it was when it was on its own that it was actually better. Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm with you. I mean, it's like they're saying things like we should know what they're talking about and didn't actually have the connective tissue already there to support that. So, yeah, I mean, it feels like they're trying to throw something in the 11th hour and then say, oh, it's been like that. And you're like, no, it's not. Same with having Bruno suddenly say, there's something else weird with your DNA. You're also, like, mutated. And I was like, what? And also, why do I care in the last couple minutes of the last episode of the season? It's not like it was like a huge stinger. And that was the other thing that I wanted to bring up too, is I felt like there were some other areas where it felt like they just didn't understand that the people making the show are probably more like my and your age, maybe a little bit older. And they're making a show where it seems like really their primary demographic is like high school to, you know, late teens, early 20s maybe. And yet then they're tying these things in, like the music in that scene, the theme played from the original X-Men animated series. But you wouldn't know that if you're high school students right now. You know what I mean? Like, I recognized it because I've seen that show. So, yeah, there were just some things like that I'm like, dude, you're missing the wrong generation here.
I think one of the things that, and this is a phase 4 issue with Marvel, is that so many things are coming out and there's a real lack of understanding about how it's all supposed to really connect together, because it just seems so scattershot. And whereas before, the MCU for the most part was pretty focused. It was, I mean, some movies here and there were, you know, obviously better than others and whatnot, but the storyline was really building towards something in a very logically progressed way. And this is, I think, where we are now. It's not necessarily the show's fault. It's just an overall issue with the connectivity in the MCU, is that right now it just feels all over the place. And I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be picking up from all these things that's actually important. Because the problem is the MCU has trained us to think that everything is important. So,
or everything is connected.
Exactly. And now things feel a lot less important or a lot less connected in a way that makes sense to just the everyday viewer, and that's kind of frustrating to me. So,
yeah.
In general, obviously all of these shows, whether it's anything on Disney Plus, from Star Wars to Marvel or whatever, how did you feel like they did with just kind of the look and the feel of the show, with the effects and all of that kind of stuff that they use here? Did they pull it off well enough for you to make it feel like a well executed show in that way, or was there stuff that you were just like, ugh?
So obviously they made a very bold choice with doing the graphics depicted along with the live action.
Yes. Yeah.
Sort of like they did with like Zombieland, where you see titles on screen with the people and stuff. And it was like comic book inspired, which really ties into, with Kamala and what she likes and what she does on her YouTube channel. But there were times when it felt like, okay, it's not really the right time for the goofiness. And I think too, it also kind of made me feel at times like it was ripping off Spider-Man, like the what's his name? Tom Holland Spider-Man movies.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you remember, like the credit scenes of one of them, I think it was No Way Home.
Yeah,
it was, playing the Ramones and having that same animation.
Yeah, that kind of very cartoony. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And then having her do the chalkboard planning and stuff is just kind of derivative as well. So there were some things like that. I felt like it was a good idea, but then it was a little overdone and maybe put in at the wrong time.
Yeah. Yeah, it was very interesting to have all of those things in the show. I think it definitely, that's where, like you said, they kind of lean into things that we've already seen with Spider-Man and a lot of other teenage type movies or whatever, where you have this cartoon version of things. I think even back to like Easy A has that same type of thing. Or, I mean, it's really, it kind of goes all the way back in some ways to like the Lizzie McGuire show, where,
oh yeah,
that kind of stuff.
Into the Spider-Verse.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. So, I don't have a problem with it. For the most part, I think the effects work in the show is pretty decent. It was pretty consistent, which is actually really the most important thing, is that you're not pulled out of the show just because things look consistent in the effects work. So I have to give them that. I think they did a really good job.
But did you like the crystals? Because I will say that did bother me a little bit.
You mean like what, her hard light substance things?
Yeah. Nightlight.
Yeah. Her, they were fine. Again, I think they're just consistently done, so I'm not pulled out by being like, oh, that one looks terrible. They always looked consistent. So, which again, I think is the most important thing. To where you're not going between scene and scene where one looks, really well done, and then the next time you see it, you're like, oh, that looks like a cartoon, So I didn't really have a problem with that. But yeah, I mean, all in all, I was not knowing what to come into with the show. It was really interesting, and on that front, and so I'm fascinated, kind of, because I feel like we've had good and bad things to say, or in the sense we've had some critiques. But I'm wondering where it is that you fall with your ratings here for Miss Marvel.
So, like I said, I think that the best thing here ended up being the focus on the family and on how that then fits in with, like we said, her getting powers. It still kept it very realistic for what we could imagine is feasible. Our suspension of disbelief is not stretched too far. But, there were some misses for me, at least with, the pieces that we talked about. But also, I felt like there were times where the musical choices didn't really make sense either. Throwing in songs like Living on a Prayer in a scene where I felt like they were trying to make it a more seriously scary fight scene. Or a song from Dirty Dancing called Be My Baby, when she's,
that's
raptured over her.
That, but yeah, that's
but like that's what I know it from.
Yeah.
I feel like they just kind of were missing the mark and using stuff that was a little too obvious, maybe. So I would say like there's a lot of things I like and then some things I don't like too. So I'm sort of in the middle. I would give it a 3 out of 5 glowing crystals.
Nice.
Because I do still think there's more substance than I expected to find in this, and introduced me to some things that I wouldn't have experience with, like the obviously Pakistani storyline piece. And I think that they made it make sense for a superhero story without feeling like you're focusing too much on the family aspect and not on it being part of the MCU. But yeah, there were just some things I wish could be tweaked. And seemed like maybe with the clandestine thing, they were planning on there being another season or something. But yeah, like there was a lot left out with the villains and didn't feel like there was as much of a threat as you would want.
Sure. Yeah.
So what about you?
It is really interesting to me because as I mentioned, I didn't have any idea what to expect coming into the show. And I ended up liking it a lot more than I thought I was going to, which was fascinating to me. And I would say, in all honesty, I think this is probably one of the better shows that Marvel has done. And part of that is the consistency in the show and the storytelling in the show. They found a way, I think, to make this character come alive and to have fun with it. And, and obviously we're doing this because we're going to be tying into what's coming next with the Marvels. And of course that was the big stinger, which is actually, I think, maybe even a scene from the movie itself coming out where her and Captain Marvel trade places on accident somehow. So I mean, guess it's the Cosmic Freaky Friday. But yeah, I would give this 3.5 out of 5 stars. Again, there are only a couple of the other Marvel shows that I would put above this. And so, after our experience with Moon Knight, where I was so disappointed, this was a really nice reprieve from that. So, let's hope that we can continue maybe on an upward trend as we look towards what's coming next, which I think is, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's She-Hulk, Attorney at Law. So, but before we get there, Christy, we should give some recommendations to everybody about things we think they should check out.
Yes. So mine is going to be a little bit different this time. But more of my content I've been consuming otherwise lately has been streaming or YouTube or Instagram based, which is really interesting to see what people can do with that. And so I really wanted to recommend, speaking of interesting people, a entrepreneur that I happened to find because I was looking at interior design and like Architectural Digest stuff. So I highly recommend checking out, if you're interested in that kind of thing, Farah Merhi, and it's spelled FARAHMERHI. And she has 3.3 million followers on Instagram because her decor work is so beautiful. And now she also even has her own collections of like kitchenware and things like that. And like, just so you can see, Matt, like one of the table decor things that she did. I mean, it is like magazine stunning. And apparently she lives near me. So yeah, I really recommend checking her out. She does videos. She recently did a Winter Wonderland theme, exploding with glitter and Christmas trees and stuff for her daughter's birthday in her living room. So yeah, check out Farah.
Awesome. Well, something that I don't think I've recommended yet, but I got a chance to watch it with my wife, which was really fun because she had never seen it, and I'd just gotten on 4K disc, which was The Untouchables, which is just a great mob movie. and just a classic cast. I mean, it's so phenomenal. So it's so worth checking out, and it looks great on the 4K disc. So if you hadn't got a chance to see it or see it in a long time, it's so worth checking out now, and even picking up. Physical media is the way to go. But Christy, if anybody wants to catch up with you and see what you've got going on, where can they find you?
You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Bespin Bell. And then, of course, when I'm not here, you can find me in the Babel Conference or on a show I do with my friends Amanda and Teresa called Sabers and Spells, which, maybe we'll be transitioning into something different since all three of our lives have been changing so much. Amanda is having a baby soon. So yeah, lots to talk about that. Maybe we'll just swap formats or something.
Awesome. Well, you could find me all over social media under the name MattBrushing02, whether that is Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Vero. You can also find me here on the network, of course, outside the 602 Club with Warp 5, which is about Star Trek Enterprise. We've got The Oar about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Saddle Up about Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Artificial Tango about Star Trek Picard, and Literary Treks about the books and the comics of Star Trek. And then over on the Nerd Party Network, there are two shows that I have. One is a completed show I did with Dre Kaufman called Owlpost. We talked about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. And last but not least, it's a Star Wars podcast I do with John Mills called Aggressive Negotiation, so check that out. And as we're recording this, John and I were just talking about coming back for Assembling Avengers. That is going to be coming back here in the fall, so take a look for that here in this very same feed as we'll be starting on Phase 4 of Marvel. But thank you so much for joining us.
And y'all come back now, you hear?
Thank you.